my dad. He taught me how to use the bus system. I had to take a bus from the suburb, go downtown Minneapolis, transfer, and then go back, even if I wanted to go across the suburb. That's just the way they did it. Where the bus stop was, downtown Minneapolis, there happened to be this club or pool hall. One day, there was a guy standing out there holding a pool stick. And he was like, "Come on in, baby, come and shoot a game of pool." You know, I had time to kill. I went in, and the guy let me win. You know, I thought, oh, I'm winning. I'm beating these guys and everything. And at 16, I thought I was pretty cool. Yeah, I met a couple guys in there, Miko and Mo. I met Miko's ex-girlfriend. She said he was a great guy. That's the one that I liked. One day when I went into the pool hall, I missed the bus when I came outside because it was the weekend and I didn't know that the bus schedule changed on the weekend. So I went back into the pool hall and asked for a ride home. And he said, "Well, I have Miko's car and he's at a party. We can drive out there. I will stay at the party. He'll then get in the car and take you home." I got in the car and he had a McDonald's cups and he asked me if I wanted a drink. I drank out of that cup and then I remember he was waking me up and it was dark outside and there's no way it should have been dark. I got scared right away because I knew something wasn't right. And I asked him, "Where are we?" And he said, "We're at a truck stop." And then he said, "Baby, do you know what I am?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'm a pimp." And I didn't know what to think. I said, "Oh, wow, that's really great, but I'm not that kind of girl." I tried to get out of the car, and he grabbed me by my hair, and then he said, "No, bitch, I didn't ask you. You're mine now. You belong to me. You're going to get in this truck and sleep with this guy, and I'm going to get the money, and we're going to go to Chicago." I asked the truck driver to help me, and the truck driver wouldn't help me, of course. When he was done raping me, he gave me back to the trafficker. He told the trafficker he wanted some of his money back because I cried. I did cry the whole time. He beat me up in the parking lot. It was dark, but there were other people there, and I think they saw, but they didn't know what to do. And this is why I tell my story, and this is why I do what I do, because I want people to know that we don't just say, "Hey, pick me. I think I want to be a prostitute. What a great career choice."
Really, when you're looking at trafficking, I think people get really hung up on the idea that it's this, new word, trafficking, and they don't think about the things that have already been there before, like slavery or like pimping. And really what you're talking about is somebody maintaining or obtaining or harboring a person, providing them to another person and using force to do it. And then what's the end result? So the end result is something like sexual exploitation, prostitution, forced labor situation.
There are 4 types of trafficking: adult labor trafficking, adult sex trafficking, child labor trafficking, and child sex trafficking. That's the way to think of it and kind of break it up in your mind. So when we think about adult labor trafficking, all of us as grown-ups go out and get jobs. We work for someone in exchange for money. Now, if someone forces you to do that work through the application of force or fraud or coercion, your work could become labor trafficking because of that application of force, fraud, or coercion. You're no longer voluntarily agreeing to do a job in exchange for a salary.
It's a crime that's often described as occurring in secret, but really in very important ways it occurs in the open. A number of our forced labor cases involve domestic servitude, where there are any number of people who are coming into the homes of these defendants. They see our victims laboring in their houses, they meet them, they encounter them, they interact with them.
Same thing is true of adult sex trafficking. As a grown-up, I can go out and I can commit the crime of prostitution by offering sex in exchange for a fee. However, if someone is making me do that through the application of force, fraud, or coercion, I'm no longer simply committing the crime of prostitution. I am instead a victim of adult sex trafficking because of that application of force, fraud, or coercion. Now, a child under the age of 18 cannot consent to being exploited or prostituted out by a third person. They simply cannot. So this term that you will hear sometimes, this is a child prostitute that's been arrested, it's really a misnomer. What you have is a child who is being preyed upon, victimized, or exploited, and made to engage in the conduct that constitutes prostitution.
When I was trafficked, I was out there from 16 to 22, and part of that trafficking was with law enforcement, actually. They picked me and another girl to be the girls that they used for their bachelor parties and things like that, and it made me feel like they were just like any other trick. And I think they didn't view me as a person per se. You know, they thought I wanted to be out there and that it was something that I was doing on my own, you know? And that's not the way it was. That's not what happened.
So many people, whether law enforcement, whether elected officials, whether jury members, don't see victims as victims because of how they perceive a quote-unquote prostitute instead of a victim. Within our agency, we've changed the way we describe people, we've changed the way we discuss certain crimes, and using words like child prostitute. A child cannot be a prostitute. A child can't choose to have sex. A child is a victim of sex trafficking. A child is raped. A child is not a child prostitute.
All kids are vulnerable to trafficking. Why? Because kids lack judgment. Biologically, children lack judgment. That's part of why we protect them. Two, I want you to think about factors that may cause them to be more vulnerable. And here we think about our kids who are regularly homeless, our kids who are truant, our kids who are addicted to various substances, our kids who come from abused and neglected homes. If you are by yourself and unprotected, are you more vulnerable to someone exploiting you? Absolutely. But I have found that we have kids who come from two-parent families, not divorced, no criminal history, no significant economic problems, no gang involvement, and they too have found themselves victims of trafficking.
We had a case recently where a young girl, she's 17 years old, going to graduate early from high school, and she's on a dating website and gets on this dating site, and somebody says, hey, you're really pretty, I would like to hang out. Pretty soon they start getting in this text conversation and talks about how she can make some money, she can do some modeling work. This is a kid who's in high school, on the surface doesn't appear to be any other issues, goes and meets this guy at a motel, and the next thing you know, she's being trafficked, prostituted to numerous Johns over the course of a couple of weeks, and the whole time she was going to school, and then at night she would go meet this guy and do the tricks, and then over the weekend she would be with the pimp the entire time.
The tactics of a trafficker are going to evolve to match their prey. Okay, these individuals are smart, they are savvy, they're typically excellent communicators, they may share many of the same qualities that psychopaths do. They have an ability to assess people very well. So for instance, someone coming from another country whose situation is very not good economically, the tactics of the trafficker may be to take advantage of that desperation, to make promises that sound great to that person at that time about a visa, about coming to live in the United States, about a valid work permit, whereas a trafficker's tactic for a 15-year-old who's run away after having a fight with his or her parents may be to simply listen, talk with that person, show an interest in them, meet a specific need that is there at that particular moment, whether it's for a ride or a phone or a couple of dollars. They are specifically listening to what their potential victim population needs or wants, and then the trafficker is taking the time to groom that individual, to adapt themselves to meet that need, and if necessary, to disguise their true purpose.
They act like they really care about them. They'll act like they're their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they understand them, and they're special, and it's just you and me, and they sell them a dream. You know, let's ride off into the sunset, we'll live happily ever after. But before we do that, first, I just need you to do this one thing for me. You know, and I would do it for you because I love you like that. Once they do it, they flip the script. I'm going to tell everybody if you don't keep doing it. I'm going to show it to your mother. I'm going to show it to your friends, your school, you know, and that's how they kind of rope them in. And inherently as human beings, we want to be loved. We want to be loved by somebody. And if we don't feel that love in our homes, we're going to be looking for that. You know, if we feel like maybe our father doesn't pay enough attention to us, and we want that and we desire that, and if that trafficker kind of shows us that and tells us, you know, that that's happening, we're going to believe it.
The perpetrator, sometimes they will abuse them, sometimes they will beat them, sometimes they will sexually molest them, and then other times they will shower them with affection. And showering them with affection is what they live for. And so they don't want to leave that. They also could be worried about their family members. A lot of times they're threatened that their family members will be shot or killed. They're abused if they don't feel like they're safe enough or can get out of the situation. They would be abused or beaten badly, and they do not want to get beat again.
I was getting beat one day when I was sick, and somebody told the law enforcement that worked that district that I was being beat by the pimp. And I was so afraid of him that even though 4 police came in my room with guns and said, "Where is he?" I lied and said he wasn't there because I just believed that he would come out of that closet, kill all those police, and then me too. I was so afraid of him. I mean, that's crazy. The police had guns, but that's what we think. That's where we're at because the violence, it just gets to you. You know, it consumes your life.
So many people ask, this is an adult human being, why don't they just leave? And the answer to that is, where do they go? This is a person with no identity. This is a person with no resources. This is a person who has a fear of what will happen if they don't meet the expectation of their pimp. So the expectation that these victims should function like we would is unrealistic because we don't know what it's like to be in that situation.
When you look at individuals in that 18 to 21, 22-year-old range, they are still processing through many of the same things that your high school senior is processing through. They are still in many ways dependents. And so those individuals, when they are put in desperate situations, often make decisions that a child might make, frankly.
We also deal with having to educate our juries about how it is that young adults who would not, would seem to have resources, who would seem to be able to just leave if they're being exploited, why it is that in those kinds of situations, the psychological fear can prevent you from seeking the help that, most of us as Americans would think would be readily available.
The face of human trafficking, to me, looks like any person that you could ever meet. And it could be an elderly person, it could be a young person, it could be a child, it could be someone that looks like they have the world in their hand. They look like they're strong and they're a capable individual. But when you break it down and what human trafficking really is and how it attacks your psychological side or your psyche, this person that is extremely strong could have, as a 9-year-old, been taken from his family, and now he is a victim of human trafficking. We need to step away from just thinking, oh, they look like this, and really look at how we look at anything else with crime.
Here we have young girls that are being trafficked and young boys being trafficked, but then on the flip side, we're seeing the traffickers get younger and younger and younger. We've seen 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old boys really that are becoming pimps and becoming traffickers. And I think that a lot of that goes back to the same, vulnerabilities that are causing someone to be trafficked are also causing somebody to get into this lifestyle. You have a group of older, gang members, older criminals saying, this is a way to avoid, getting caught by the cops. This is a way that you can do something and earn money and earn things for yourself. And man, here's all you got to do. You just got to sit back and you can collect the money while these girls go do this. And, once upon a time, a pimp was some guy in a hat and the shoes. But now, a pimp, the term is something that you're making something better. So whether you're pimping your ride to make your car better or your outfit looks pimp, you're growing up and you want that cool car that the guy has in the neighborhood, and you want those nice speakers, and you want a new pair of Jordans. And you have young men and boys that are looking at it saying, it's not a problem to sell girls, all it is about making money, and pimping's cool, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? So the end result is that In the same way that young girls are being groomed to be exploited, we're seeing that young boys are being groomed to be the exploiters or the traffickers.
Trafficking isn't a crime that discriminates. You may be from the smallest town in a rural area of Mexico. You may be from a huge city in New York. It doesn't matter if you're from here, if you're here legally, if you have criminal history. It doesn't matter what your background is. If you are a victim of crime in my jurisdiction, then my job is to bring the perpetrator to justice.
One of our officers had a vehicle come through one day and conducted an inspection on them, and there was a young female passenger with the commercial driver, and it just didn't look right. It was in Iowa, it was in December. Our weather's not the best then, and this individual was dressed for a warmer climate and had no luggage. The officer went a little further, started to ask some questions, eventually found out this girl was a foster child runaway. This girl was actually tied into a human trafficking ring out of the Jacksonville, Florida area. Again, she was 14 years old. It came to be that they were able to put together a case on this, and the trafficker was sentenced and put away for life.
People always ask me, where's human trafficking occurring? And it's occurring everywhere. But because typically the pimp has to pick up the victim and bring them to whoever it is, the John, they have to move to get there. And that means they got to use our highway systems. That becomes their Achilles heel. That becomes our power base as an enforcement arm of the human trafficking issue.
Where a criminal investigations division sting operation or undercover operation or an informant debrief is an intentional effort that takes time, and once it's over, everyone knows it happened, and law enforcement is kind of burned in that area for the foreseeable future. By adding the patrol function, that's an ongoing, never-ending presence of law enforcement that is otherwise normal. You're not asking them to do anything more than what they were doing before. You're just asking them to be open and pay attention, and if they see indicators of trafficking, then stay plugged in and take the appropriate action. When a drug trafficker is carrying a kilo of cocaine, it's immediately apparent that the kilo of cocaine is evidence. When a human trafficker is carrying a victim, there could be signs throughout the vehicle. It could be condoms, it could be journals, it could be prepaid cards, business cards.
If I can see some indicators in the driver, like they won't allow the other individual to speak, that's one indicator. If that individual has their identification, that's another indicator. The victim has tattoos of the perpetrator on them, that's something that is an indicator.
I think the most important thing that law enforcement can do is, one, recognize that the situation may not be exactly what it first appears to be. Two, you've got to be paying attention to all of the individuals that are in that vehicle or that apartment or that home or that hotel room. Who all's there? Identify all of them. Figure out what their relationship is to one another. Be paying attention to verbal and nonverbal cues. Separate them out from one another when you're talking to them. Don't necessarily assume, if they claim to be a family, that they are a family. If you have a 16-year-old in the back who doesn't necessarily look like they're part of this family, or you're picking up a vibe that that's not the case, then separate that individual out. Ask her some questions outside the presence of the adults in the car. Now, it may turn out that it's exactly what the individuals are saying and there's nothing going on there, but you've done no harm by peeling back those layers and asking those additional questions.
The simple fact of the matter is that we don't always know who's being trafficked. And so when you talk about how you're going to have a victim-centered approach to investigating sex trafficking or labor trafficking, then everybody we contact in a situation, we should be treating them as though it is a trafficking situation until we determine otherwise.
If I'm the victim, I need you to separate me from whoever I'm with. You know, if I'm brought to a place where I can't see them and they can't see me or hear, I'm going to feel more comfortable, and I might be able to really tell you what's happening to me. I need you to be kind to me. I need you to not act like this is all I'm good for. And I need you to keep the trafficker away from me so he can't even look at me, you know, the rest of the time that we are together.
If you are unprepared, they are not. They have a plan. They've instructed their victim on what to say if they encounter law enforcement. They have made very clear what the consequences will be to that individual from them, but they've also told them a whole bunch of lies about what you will do to them. They want that victim to be more afraid of the system than they are of the trafficker. And many of these victims, having come through hard times, whether it's being part of the child welfare system, whether it's having had prior criminal history, they have had rough interactions with the system. So when someone tells them, when their trafficker tells them, they're going to lock you up, you're going to be forced into a situation that you don't want to go to, those things ring true.
Because of the interactions that I've had with law enforcement, it made it really difficult for me to trust them. Trafficker told me, all they're going to do is arrest you. And that was true. I've been arrested hundreds of times. And so it kind of made the person who was telling the truth was the trafficker and not the police. When I'm training law enforcement, I always ask them, to give us a little extra time because we don't trust them.
Talk to the person, take the time, assess the individual, and really try and get the gist of that person to figure out if there is something that is not right. That to me is probably one of the most important things, is to take the time to look at it.
We got pulled over. We were in an old Pontiac. The cop came up, asked us where we were going. We were all scared. I didn't want to talk. The wife-in-law I knew had a gun. So I just looked at the floor and didn't say anything. It should have been very noticeable, but it wasn't. The girl in the front seat said that we were going to visit family in that area. None of us had an address. If they would have asked us individually, they would have known something was wrong. Because we weren't going to the same place. We weren't going to see family. We were going to be trafficked. So we wouldn't have had the same story. Our stories wouldn't have matched at all. We wouldn't have known what to say. And it would have been very visible that something was wrong had we been asked questions.
If I would feel uncomfortable letting this person go, knowing in my heart that there is something going on and they are not telling me what it is, and I've got the indicators of human trafficking, I've got the stories that are not correct, I can't let that go. I have to protect that person, and I have to attempt to get them help.
There's nothing wrong with calling someone to the scene to help you make that decision at any point in the investigation, help you find the right questions to ask, help you look at the evidence in the right way, help you put it all into context and make the good decision to further the investigation or to release the vehicle.
No matter what you do, whether you are a patrol officer or whether you are the detective investigating the case, document. Document well. Take notes, translate those notes into your reports. Take the time to pick up the details about what people are saying, about how they look. Photo document a location. If you go into a hotel room where you're rescuing a potential runaway that's being prostituted, photograph that hotel room. All of it. Be looking for potential evidence of ledgers, whether that's in a spiral notebook or whether that's in someone's phone. Traffickers oftentimes are placing their internet advertisements on their phones, on their laptops, on their computers. So you've now received training that allows you to place that information in a search warrant. Make sure you take the time to go all the way through that evidence that's generated. Don't just assume that one photograph or one text or one little piece of that internet history is all you need. There may be an entire wealth of information that can be generated as a result of you taking the time to secure these items and then that you take the time to do the search warrants to get them. So preparing that search warrant for Facebook, preparing that search warrant for MocoSpace, preparing that ICAC subpoena for Backpage. These victims and survivors typically are going to require more corroboration than many other types of cases, and that has to do with their background. They've got prior criminal history. We've got to have the little pieces of corroboration that make their story ring true. So to do that, you've got to be collecting that on the front end. It's very hard to get on the back end.
I think it is vital to get the prosecutor, whoever that is, whether it's a district attorney or the attorney general's office, on board as early as possible. That not only helps him digest the evidence and the interviews and all of the confessions and whatever else there is to consider, but it also gives them ownership. The investigator, the trooper, the caseworker, the victim services worker are all going to be very invested in the case from the beginning because they've dealt person to person. By getting the prosecutor involved early, you get the benefit of them being better educated on the case and being able to prepare a better case, but the ownership there is greater because they've been on board since the beginning, and you didn't just bring them a case and say, hey, what can we do with this?
When you think about trafficking, whether it's from the investor, the transporter, the people who are actually recruiting the victims, the people who are marketing those victims, or the people who are knowingly purchasing those trafficked people, every one of them can be charged with trafficking and can be prosecuted for trafficking because they are knowingly participating and knowingly benefiting in a venture that involves the trafficking of another person.
The big thing is we have to become more educated on this issue. We have to understand what trafficking is. We have to understand what the signs of trafficking are, who the victims are, who the traffickers are. And the thing is it's not a crime that we can turn our back on. It's not a crime that we can say that's not happening in our city, because the simple fact is that it happens in any city. Anywhere there's a demand for sex, anywhere there's a demand for certain forms of labor, anywhere there's a demand for somebody to be exploited, it's going to be happening in your city. And so as cops, we have to take that and say, okay, and now I have the information, what am I going to do about it?
For years, we've used words that have been harmful. So by starting with the easy things, starting with the small things, like using the proper word, children don't have sex, children are raped. Pimp is not a good thing, a pimp is a sex trafficker. So by changing our vocabulary and changing the way we see people, I think is a big challenge culturally.
We're all there is to go and bring down the bad guy. So we've got to be committed to finding these individuals, building strong cases against them, prosecuting them to the limits of the law, so that we begin to winnow down that population and begin to put enough people in prison so that other people are deterred from the conduct. Now, the way we do it is wrapped up in this idea of a victim-centered approach.
With the victim-centered approach, our job is to make sure that the victim is okay from the get-go. So this is what we call the soft room, where we conduct our interviews. It's important that we have the victims as comfortable as possible, where it's a little bit more like a living room or den. We can give them some waters and snacks. We have blankets that are donated constantly. Generally, the victims would go to a station where it's usually a cold jail environment. By having this room and conducting our interviews in here, we're getting much more important information that we need to have up front in these investigations.
We're going to treat that person with courtesy. We are going to recognize that that individual has likely been through trauma, and it may have been for a very short period of time, or it may have been trauma that's been extended over years and years and years. That person comes with their own baggage, their own fears, their own interactions with the system, their own interactions with the trafficker. So when we are working with that person, we need to be sensitive to all those things. If that person needs the assistance of a victim advocate, we want to make that available to them.
I'm excited to see people partner with victim advocates and use survivor leaders as much as possible. I think that's amazing. It lets that victim look at that survivor as someone who's been successful and who's made it, and they see that law enforcement and that person are working together. That is amazing, and that helps them so much. It gives them hope, and lets them know that they too can make it.
I'll be honest with you, it wasn't on our radar, and I've been in law enforcement 38 years, and I'm kind of ashamed to say it wasn't on my radar. But we had an opportunity to meet with our Attorney General, had been at some conferences around the nation, and all of a sudden it became an issue to his radar. And he met with us and my division director and a couple other folks from our agency, and he said, we want to take a better, stronger approach on this. I want Iowa to be the state that the traffickers are going to do a detour around. And at that time they introduced us to the Truckers Against Trafficking contact, And we developed a very good professional relationship with TAT and continued to look at ways that we together can help promote the awareness of this.
I was looking at within our section, shortly after I took over here, what can we do in commercial enforcement? And the one thing I learned about truck drivers is that they are the most professional drivers we've got running up and down the highways. With that professionalism, it was a natural transition to partner with them, to see if we could get them to help us be our eyes and ears. There's more truck drivers out there than our law enforcement officers.
Truck drivers have the awesome ability to pass without notice in certain areas that police officers definitely cannot pass in. Because I'm an inspector for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, I run across and I stop a lot of truck drivers, and I've been given information when, say, a trucking company is having issues or there's something going on.
We are asking them to contact us and to call a specific number, and that's the number that we've learned through Truckers Against Trafficking, through Polaris. Well, the next step was to look at our truck driving CDL schools. And when we looked at those schools, we said, what can we do here? Can we come and teach for you? And they said, oh, absolutely. They wanted us to come and teach. We were able to open an hour and require all truck drivers who go through Ohio schools to have 1 hour block of Truckers Against Trafficking.
Motor carriers, they'll call in and want a training program on a regulation, or they have a driver's meeting, and we just take the opportunity to visit with the carrier and say, would you be okay if we spend some 20-30 minutes visiting about human trafficking? And I don't know we've ever had a trucking company tell us no.
We did see a 32% increase in calls in the state of Ohio to the hotline, and an additional, I think, 125 cases, specific cases. It's because of the relationship with the Truckers Against Trafficking, and in particularly the truck drivers, that is helping in the state of Ohio to help us put a dent in this problem.
So it takes an entire team to do one of these investigations, and once I get my investigation started, I have the ability to walk over to the Department of Children and Family Services and have them start working up if there's a history on the individual, and if I have bits or pieces of information that aren't making sense, I can hand it over to our research department and they can help in compiling the evidence or information needed for that. And also with CAS being here co-located with us, I can get them right to the services that they need.
CAST has been working in human trafficking for over 16 years. We represent the service providers for the task force. CAST itself collaborates with over 90 service providers in the community, and we've always worked with our law enforcement partners, but with this task force, it has brought that relationship to a whole new level. Being in the same space allows us to really see what the other person does and have a better understanding for each other's roles, and that overall just helps collaboration and benefits the clients because we're able to work better for them on these cases.
To make this a collaborative effort, a very comprehensive effort that involves not only federal law enforcement, but also local law enforcement, members of the community. We consider it our mission to go to local civic organizations, to basically go whenever we're called, along with several members of our office, to educate members of the community about human trafficking, but not just about the laws as it relates to human trafficking, but also about how members of the community can help to be a support for victims of human trafficking.
We know that probably 90% of the solution to this problem is going to be our community, because they're going to provide a lot of the information that we need to prosecute these cases to conclusion. People like taxi cab drivers, people who work in businesses along some of these boulevards and streets, pretty much anybody that has any kind of contact with the individuals that are potentially victims and out on the streets are people who can help us. As we get better at developing our relationships in the community, we can have better information that will help these victims in the long run.
Human trafficking, and it's not a question of if it's out there. It's a huge industry that has been often overlooked. As far as my department and the way that we are trying to curtail that is to get the training out there, to get the troopers invested into this program. We got to get them educated to recognizing the indicators.
we kept saying, we need to have a kind of multi-jurisdictional response to this. It's a multi-jurisdictional crime. It's not like somebody just sits in Denver and traffics girls only in Denver or only in Aurora or only in Lakewood.
Sometimes our officers in our state, we're in the middle of the country. We're a small rural state, population of 3 million. Don't think, well, it's not going to happen here. It's in the bigger metropolitan areas. And I think it was a real wake-up call for them to realize that, no, this occurs right here in every community across the nation.
If we don't do the same thing across the nation, that provides opportunities for the bad guys. They go to every state and learn what our weaknesses are. But if we're working together across the nation, both in the trucking industry and in law enforcement and other government entities, if we're all saying the same kind of message, we're all saying call the same number, then it makes it much, much harder for them to do what they do and to victimize more people.
My advice for other agencies would be to make human trafficking a priority, to go out and intentionally look for victims, to intentionally look for traffickers, look for the clues that human trafficking is going on, and by making it a priority, by counting your human trafficking productivity the same way that you count your stolen car recoveries, the same way you count your drug seizures, fugitive arrests, by making it that kind of a accountable priority, the rescues will increase and you'll be able to see the difference that your agency is making in the lives of victims.
If this were your child, if this were your family member, if this were your relative or friend or someone that you cared about, how would you want them to be treated by the system? And what can you do to rub those rough edges off the system, but still respect the role that you are to play, which is to bring that perpetrator to justice?
A woman that came to my group told me once, she's like, Beth, I need to get out. And I said, well, why do you say that? And she said, because the police were nice to me. I mean, in her worldview, it's like the police always treated her like crap. And all of a sudden, the police are starting to be nice to her. And she's like, maybe I do have value. Maybe I am worthwhile. And I don't think the police that maybe talked to her actually understood the kindness that they gave to her. And I don't think they understand that they were a hero in what they did. They just gave her a little random act of kindness. And she took that as self-worth. And so it's starting to change. I mean, they're starting to do things like that. I think that's amazing, and I think it's wonderful. It's going to make huge changes.